Me, Churchill River.
The Honourable Member.
Mr. Speaker, during the 2015 and 2019 elections and as recently as this summer, the Prime Minister repeated his now broken promise to lift all drinking water advisories by March 2021. The government has used COVID as cover, but that does not hold up under scrutiny. The member for Kenora has been in contact with several Indigenous community leaders in his riding who've been able to continue with infrastructure projects, including water, during the pandemic. Will the government admit that the clean drinking water promised to Indigenous people was empty from the beginning?
Here, here. The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are not backing away from our commitment to ending all long-term drinking water advisories to First Nations on reserve, but instead making a more profound commitment to the long term. In every community with a long-term water advisory, there's a project team, an action plan, and people dedicated to lifting it. And last week we announced $1.5 billion to accelerate the access to clean water in the short and the long term, as well as the stability necessary to ensure this occurs not only by spring 2021, but after that. While we can't underestimate the impact of COVID-19 on long-term drinking water timelines, we're optimistic.
The Honourable Member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, last week, instead of owning up to his own failure to Indigenous communities, the Prime Minister hid behind this minister and forced him to take responsibility for not meeting this March 2021 promise. When it was time for an election promise, the Prime Minister was more than glad to be in front of the camera and centre stage and to be in the spotlight. Now that this promise has been broken, he is nowhere to be found on this. Mr. Speaker, that is not leadership. How can Indigenous people trust the words of this Prime Minister and his government?
The Honourable Member. The Honourable Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, let me complete what I was about to say. While we can't underestimate the impact of COVID-19 on long-term drinking water timelines, we're optimistic that by spring 2021, the number of communities under long-term drinking water advisories will be down to 12. We're committed to working with these communities in partnership for the long term. That's what the announcement last week of $1.5 billion to communities was about. And yes, that is my responsibility to get it done as a Minister of the Crown.
Member.